Dear followers, dear BILGESAM YouTube watchers, today I'd like to introduce my guest, Mr. Abbas Aslani. He is from Iran, journalist and senior research fellow at the Center for Middle East Strategic Studies. And today we will speak with him about Iran's last presidential elections and Iran's foreign policy in the near future. Welcome, Mr. Aslani.
Well, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to start with a general question. So actually, the presidential elections, you can analyze the situation better because we read the Iran media, international media. Actually, the win of Mr. Raisi, how was acknowledged in the Iranian society? Was it expected that he will win, or it was unexpected result for Iran society, actually? And please begin with explanation. Who was Ibrahim Raisi before the elections? Please.
It was not surprised to hear and to think that Ibrahim Raisi would win the presidential election in the country, which was held last Friday. But we can say that, Iranian elections in the past and previous rounds, they have had surprises. That was why maybe we were a bit cautious about the results of these, let's say, elections. Ibrahim Raisi is considered to be a conservative politician. He has been, let's say, attorney general in some cities of Iran. He ran for presidential race 4 years ago, and he could secure something like maybe 16, I think, million votes, but he couldn't win. And then I remember President Rouhani won against him. Before, this time that he was running for president, he has been the head of the judiciary in the country. And this presidential election was held against the backdrop of, in a context where the conservatives were holding the other branches of government, meaning the parliament, as well as the judiciary, where he was a head. And now with the presidency, the conservatives are taking over the third branch of government, which is the executive branch. So this is very important, and that's why we could see that the conservatives were very serious to gain this, let's say, third branch of government. Raisi has been considered a conservative politician, but this doesn't mean that all conservatives are the same or unified in the country. There can be differences among them when it comes to domestic politics and when it comes to the foreign policy. When we are talking about foreign policy, it's on regional issues, that's on the nuclear deal and some other issues, engaging with neighboring countries as well as engaging and working with other countries in the world. When Raisi won the election, we could see that different factions, parties, and candidates, even in the election, they admitted the defeat and they congratulated Mr. Raisi without any controversy and without any problem. And interestingly, President Rouhani was one of the first politicians to congratulate the president-elect. And he went to the office of Mr. Raisi in the, let's say, judiciary in order to congratulate him and to say that he and his cabinet are ready to work with him for a good and smooth transition. Since then, we have been seeing that some other officials from the cabinet, including Foreign Minister Javad Zarif, as well as Vice President Jahangiri, have met Mr. Raisi. And we could see that he held his first his first press conference after being elected and winning the election. Large amount of the questions were addressing the foreign policy related issues, including the nuclear deal as well as the region. So we didn't see any problem in, let's say, when he won, and many other factions, including from some reformist officials, also congratulated him. And now he's preparing his team, and they are working in order to form a cabinet. He has said that he will be the president of all Iranians, including those who voted for other candidates, and even for those who didn't vote in the election. From now on, we will be having some maybe 40 and some days remaining till he takes over and President Rouhani says goodbye to presidency. And when he takes over, let's say after 40 and some days, he will have a couple of weeks in order to introduce his candidates as ministers to the parliament. After 2 weeks that he takes office, I think the current ministers will be gone and the parliament will need to, let's say, confirm the new introduced ministers on different areas, including the foreign minister.
Thank you very much. Now, the second question, actually, the continues of this, my first question. How do you think Javad Zarifi will continue as a foreign minister of Iran under Ibrahim Raisi presidency or cabinet, or there will be change in foreign policy candidate?
Well, according to my personal knowledge and information, I know that Foreign Minister Zarif and Mr. Raisi, they have had good personal relations. And even before becoming president-elect, Raisi met Javad Zarif several times in the past. They know each other, and they exchanged views on foreign policy and nuclear deal yesterday. But this doesn't mean that maybe Foreign Minister Zarif will remain as a foreign minister in the upcoming administration in the country, because now we have a conservative president in place, and it is expected that he brings some new faces and some new, let's say, officials to his team and cabinet. And as far as I know, there might be a new foreign minister in the country.
So if Javad Zarifi remains as a foreign minister, does it mean that Iran's foreign policy will be same? Or as international media calls Mr. Raisi as hardliner, so will be there any change? Because from the last briefing, Mr. Raisi's briefing, we know that he rejected directly any meeting with Joe Biden. So is it the first step of showing that Mr. Raisi is so hardliner that he rejects any meeting with Joe Biden?
Well, I think even if Mr. Zarif leaves, it doesn't mean that Iran's foreign policy will have a big change. When you look at foreign policy decision-making process in the country, you can see that the administration is not the only player, or the president is not the only player who can make a decision in this regard. We have other bodies, including the Supreme National Security Council, which has something like 10 members. And it might vary from issue to other issue, from 10 to 11 or 12 on different issues. But only half of the members of that council are from the cabinet. We have other officials from the establishment or other institutions. This means that all the decisions on foreign policy are not made by the administration. We also have parliament who can pass legislations. For example, the case of the strategic law for the lifting of the sanctions that was passed some months ago, it somehow pushed the administration to scale up nuclear activities, to resume 20% enrichment. And then with the administration, they decided to increase it even more. So we have the parliament on the other side, as well as expediency council, who plays a role when there is maybe a difference between parliament and the administration or guardian council. And in the end, we have the leader who confirms or approves the decisions by the Supreme National Security Council. So that is a process which somehow is more complicated than it seems. And so as a result, a new president, even a conservative one, will not mean that the foreign policy of Iran will have a major change. But the changes can be maybe relative. It can be in the tone, or maybe the tactics, or they may, be leaning toward more towards some areas, and maybe being stricter on some other areas. When it comes to nuclear deal, it was a question that what would be the policy of Mr. Raisi if he is elected as a president. So in third presidential televised debate, he made clear that he would continue complying with the terms of the nuclear deal as an agreement that was approved by the leader, and as a contract which is the commitment by the country. And he said that he will continue to do so. And he said that he supports any negotiations that meet the demands of the people and serves the interests of the country. So as a result, that indicated that Mr. Raisi will have no problem with negotiations. And in the case of, let's say, any necessity, he will continue those negotiations in order to lift the sanctions. So on other issues, when it comes to the region, he also talked on some issues, including the dialogue with Saudi Arabia. He said that Iran will try to engage during his presidency with all countries in the world, including the regional and neighboring countries, including with Saudi Arabia. And he said that he is open and there is no obstacle for reopening embassies in Iran and Saudi Arabia, as well as relations and any further dialogue. So this is exactly the same foreign policy which is taking place by Iran. And it seems more of a continuity than a change in the foreign policy if we want to address the presidency of Ibrahim Raisi. Maybe in his new upcoming conservative president, we might be seeing Iran, let's say, being more, leaning toward working with Eastern countries like China, like Russia, and most specifically the neighboring countries, including Turkey and some other countries like Iraq and some other Arab countries in the region. So this will mean that we are not expecting a big and major change in the country. And so it is somehow the continuation of the status quo, maybe with some minor changes. One of the expectations from him will be to somehow to follow and pursue a trade-based, maybe foreign policy. Because Iran, he is taking over at a time of a difficulty where country has been suffering from economic sanctions and hardship, as well as coping with the pandemic. In order to be able to handle those issues, he will need to somehow work with other countries in order to be able to do some trade, to lift the sanctions, as well as he has said that he will try hard to fight against the corruption. I think all of these need to go hand in hand if he wants to be a successful president. So, as I said, the changes might be minor, and not a major change is expected in the years, or at least maybe during his term.
Okay, you have already mentioned some foreign policy issues in Iran's near future, but let's start step by step with explanation. According to your mind, how do you think? What are the main strategic priorities in foreign policy? If you can count 5 of them, which 5 of them you can say that Iran should solve these strategic priorities in its foreign policy in the next 5 years, for example?
Well, there might be some issues or even challenges when it comes to foreign policy. One of the issues that the conservatives have been critical about the current administration has been that they have been saying that the Rouhani administration has been mostly focused on the nuclear deal, meaning the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, also known as the JCPOA. So in his first press conference, Ibrahim Raisi yesterday said that his foreign policy will not start by the JCPOA, and it will not be limited only to JCPOA. It means that he somehow wants to outline a comprehensive foreign policy whereby the nuclear deal is one piece in that puzzle and not hold the picture. So he will try, when it comes to the nuclear deal, to pursue the negotiations and to be able to lift the sanctions. And if we see that the nuclear deal is revived before he takes over, I mean during this transition era, he has said that he will try to implement it. But he was also critical of the United States. He said that the US had promised to lift the sanctions, but they didn't, and they withdrew from the nuclear deal. And also the Europeans, they didn't fulfill their commitments. The question yesterday that was asked about any likely meeting between Iranian and American presidents, he said directly no. But I think what he meant was that the problems, or maybe the escalation between Iran and the United States, cannot be resolved by let's say a simple meeting in front of cameras and just by, maybe we may call it, a photo diplomacy. Maybe that was something that Donald Trump was looking for and seeking. So he wanted to try to take some pictures in front of media. But what matters for Iran is to lift the sanctions effectively and practically. Why Iran is emphasizing on the verification of the sanctions as well as effective lifting of the sanctions? The reason is that when the nuclear deal was clinched in 2015, back then, Iran was expecting a better economic relations with other countries, specifically with Europeans and neighboring countries. But things didn't turn out to be the same as they expected. And when the United States withdrew from the nuclear deal and imposed and reimposed or relabeled the sanctions, Iran has lost the trust toward the United States. And now it wants to make sure that before US returns and re-enters to the nuclear deal, it lifts the sanctions effectively in a way that Iran can enjoy from the benefits and dividends of those, let's say, sanctions removal. That's why Iran has been emphasizing on that. And that was one of the issues that Ibrahim Raisi stressed in his press conference yesterday. And so that's why, because of this trust, I think now we are not at a time or a condition, and the situation is not right for a meeting between Iranian and American presidents. And what Iran is looking for is not just a simple meeting between both presidents, but maybe resolving the problems vis-a-vis the nuclear deal and reviving the deal practically. What can make the nuclear deal survive in the long run is the commitment by all the parties to the nuclear deal. or else I think we can see the collapse of the deal. So when it comes to the other issues, maybe he will need to work with countries in the region. One of the priorities for him to be somehow to, let's say, incorporate the trade and economy-based approach to Iran's foreign policy when it comes to working with neighboring countries. There have been ideas, or let's say even criticism among some experts and conservatives in the country, that Iran has not been able to enjoy the potential economic cooperation with neighboring countries when it comes to transit, maybe when it comes to investing the production capacity in the country in order to be able to export some products to other countries, or maybe finding some ways in order to find, let's say, common grounds and interest in working with neighboring countries. He has said this, and I think he will need to do some adjustments in foreign ministry, maybe to add that economic aspect to this ministry in order to be able to have and enjoy better cooperation. However, we saw that during even Minister Zarif, we could created a deputy for economic affairs. They tried to work on it. They had some instructions for Iranian embassies in different countries in order to focus on this. So I think Raisi will try to improve this more. So one of the challenges that might happen for him is on the nuclear deal. If we assume that the nuclear deal is revived now, we have been hearing that Western countries, including some European countries and the United States, talking about reaching a new JCPA or JCPA plus. It means that including some other issues like regional issues or Iran's missile issues in a new deal. I think this can be one of the challenges for new administration. And Raisi yesterday, he made clear that he will not accept any negotiations on missiles or regional issues, saying that he will not extend the nuclear deal on non-nuclear, with adding non-nuclear issues. This can be one of the challenges, and I think time will tell us that what will happen. And I think adding some other nuclear issues to this deal will be somehow complicating the process and can create challenges for both sides. When it comes to the region, I think because Iran's policy in the region is decided again in a process whereby administration is just one part and not the whole part. So we are not seeing a big change in this. Iran will try to continue maybe dialogue with countries like Saudi Arabia, as well as some other Arab countries in the region, in order to bring some de-escalation. And I think if the nuclear deal is revived, this can have some impact in the region. We can see more stability among the players in the region. And what happened during Trump presidency was also another reason to tell the regional countries to think that they need to resolve the problems in the region by themselves. And maybe by emerging some new developments in the region, Iran will need to engage in more bilateral cooperation or even trilateral, let's say, cooperation or engagement with other countries. When it comes maybe to Turkey, Iran has been engaging on Syria, and a couple of days we could see that the foreign ministers of Iran, Turkey, and Afghanistan also met together in Antalya. So this kind of engagement can continue to happen with Saudi Arabia, some other Arab countries in Persian Gulf, as well as some other countries who are, let's say, in the proximity of the region. But what will happen to the Iran's relations with European countries might be a question for European capitals. I think if European countries and governments, they are ready to fulfill their commitments under the nuclear deal. And if they show good faith, I think even during a conservative president, we can see Iran cooperating with European capitals. But if European capitals, they continue to, let's say, not to fulfill promises, not to let Iran to enjoy economic cooperation with different companies or countries, that can somehow exacerbate the situation. What can be the result in that case? That the Europeans do not work with Iran. Iran will more and further move toward Eastern countries like China, as I said, with Russia, Turkey, some neighboring countries, and those maybe other countries who might have the tendency to work with Tehran. There are some other issues as well, but I think economy, region, maybe how to cope with the European countries, what to do on nuclear deal. These are among the top issues. And when it comes to the United States, I'm not expecting an improvement or establishing of ties between Iran and the United States in the years to come. Maybe when it comes to the nuclear deal, this might cause a kind of de-escalation between the two countries rather than a rapprochement. So I'm seeing this in terms of decreasing and reducing tensions than becoming friends. So, and we are not expecting a major change when it comes to the relations with the United States, because normally the conservative administrations have had stricter policies or tones when it comes toward to the United States.
We know that Iran is one of the most important regional actors in this region for stability for the whole region. And let's start with Syria issue. We know that there is a Astana trilateral meeting, Iran, Turkey, and Russia. They try to solve this Syrian crisis together. But at the same time, we know that there are a lot of differences, mainly concerning to the presence of Bashar Assad in Syria. So how do you think, how will Iran's Syria policy will follow in the next years in its relation with Turkey?
Well, I think it can be somehow maybe by new administration, maybe the course and direction might not change when it comes to Syria. But I think in the phase that we are in, maybe Iran will try to continue to cooperate and work with Syrian government as well as other countries like Russia and Turkey and maybe some other countries in order to help Syria to rebuild the country and to bring peace and stability to the country. It's not just about up to Iran, but to Syria and Syrian people themselves and what other countries in the region or extra region do. You know, the art of diplomacy is valuable and important when you have differences. When you all have common grounds and without any differences, I think negotiations, working, and diplomacy might not matter a lot. I think the case of Syria was a good example that the countries like maybe Iran, Russia, and Turkey, they might they had some maybe differences when it came to the Syrian issue, but they were able to form a process whereby they could cooperate and engage constructively on the issue. This can be a model for other issues. We might be seeing some developments in Afghanistan in the days, months, or years to come. We have been seeing a war in Yemen. After some years, we are seeing that the innocent Yemeni people are being killed, and the war hasn't ended. I think, again, the countries in the region, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Yemenis, and maybe others can contribute to the peace establishing peace in the region, including ending the war. And when it comes to other parts of the region, I think a similar thing needs to happen. You know, we have had different international organizations or different alliances or treaties or, different bodies and, let's say, groups, but, or leagues or, let's say, different formats. We have been seeing that maybe in the past years, they have not been that much effective. What can the solution be? It can be bilateral engagement between the countries, or it can be multilateral ones. So I think what we need is multiple bilaterals or multilaterals in the region in order to be able to resolve problems in the region. And I hope that with a new administration in Tehran, this can be one of the cases that the upcoming administration follows in order to do that. And this is something which cannot happen just one-sided. It is something which needs also the reaction or the action from the other parties who are present in the region.
You have already mentioned Iran and Afghanistan relations. Last meeting in Antalya, these foreign ministers of Iran, Afghanistan, and Turkey. And we know that United States and other Western military will withdraw from Afghanistan in September, right? How it is? How can you analyze this situation? Probably Iran supports the withdrawal of United States from Afghanistan, but from other side, we know that there is a Taliban issue, the problem of Taliban, and it will make more problematic in Afghanistan after United States withdrew from Afghanistan. So, what is the reaction of Iran to this American withdrawal from Afghanistan?
Well, I need to say that Afghanistan, as a neighboring country who shares land borders with Iran, is very important to the country because the security and stability there can impact the security in eastern borders of Iran. So that's why Iran has trying to be engaging with Afghan government, as well as even talking to Taliban group, in the past. So Iran is trying to make sure that instability is not back to Afghanistan. However, it has been criticizing the U.S. role in the country because when the Americans, they invaded Afghanistan, instead of making it a safer country, we are seeing a vacuum of power in the country and instability. We are seeing that people even evading the country because they are afraid that the future that is awaiting for them cannot be a good and safe one. And Iran has been critical of the U.S. behavior in Afghanistan because it believes that the U.S., let's say, has not been acting responsibly in Afghanistan. Iran wants to make sure that Afghanistan is safe and secure. But I think we are seeing that the tensions and escalation happening in Afghanistan and this, let's say, vacuum of power and these kind of tensions might have some implications, not just for Iran, even for the region. And so Tehran doesn't see some Western countries, including the United States, honest when it comes to their policies in Afghanistan. That Iran has been demanding the exit of the United States, not just from the Afghanistan, but from the whole region. But Americans seem to be, let's say, caring about maybe their own interest, and they have been, let's say, ignoring what is happening in the ground and for the people of Afghanistan. And this is, I think, an issue which will be more, let's say, will have further urgency in the even days or weeks or months to come. This is not a far issue, and we're talking as we speak. There are developments in Afghanistan. So I think the general and the whole policy of Iran toward Afghanistan will be to ensure that a safe and stable neighbor exists by it, and the borders of Iran and Afghanistan are safe, and that there is not a vacuum of power in the country that can have some consequences, not just for Afghanistan, for Iran and some other countries. And I think it's not just related, or it's not just the case of Iran. It's also maybe the countries like China, India, Pakistan, Russia, Turkey, and those, let's say, countries, and the Afghanistan itself specifically. I think, I mean, they have interests, and they might have some, let's say, uh, their interests being endangered by developments in the country. But what needs to happen in Afghanistan, I think, is up to the Afghan people. They need to decide. But I think behaving irresponsibly, like the United States, can have its own consequences, and which needs to be avoided. And how this can be, I think, achieved, this is a complicated process, and that's a difficult question. And I think much of that will depend on what will happen in Afghanistan, and then we will need to see that how things can proceed and what we will need to do. And I think, but Iran will need to work with Afghanistan in order to see that there is a stable Afghanistan with a strong state there, and there is no bombing, there is no insecurity in the country, and there are no extremist groups in different parts of the country, including in areas near to Iranian borders. If that happens, I think this will be in the interest of Afghanistan. If they have a stable state and they have security and stability, as well as it will be in the interest of Iran and other countries also in the region.
China is one of the main strategic partners of Iran. We know that especially when there are sanctions from the Western world to Iran. We know that there are military and economic relations mainly, but my question is not the analysis of these military and economic relations. Just personally for me is interesting, and probably for the most followers of BILGESAM and our followers is interesting. The question concerning to East Turkestan issue, because mainly I don't know how this East Turkestan question, the problem with Uyghurs seems from Tehran, but in Turkey we know that there are a lot of pressure towards these Uyghur minorities in China, in East Turkestan part. And just I'd like to know whether is it in agenda of Iran when it comes to any relations to China, the question of Muslims in China, or generally it's not the problem for China-Iran relations?
Well, I think, as I have been asking some maybe officials, I mean, on this, they have been saying that they have been engaging with Russia on this issue. And they have been working in a way to be able to contribute to this issue, and not just to do a propaganda against China. And I think that would be more constructive if you can effectively engage with China on this, rather than going to go public, let's say, maybe propaganda against the country, or let's say somehow highlighting in a way that you want to maybe benefit from the issue rather than to help the Muslims who are there. But China is a big country. It's an economic power. Iran and China have had traditionally good relations. And when Iran could see the maximum pressure during Trump from American side, and as a result of the sanctions by the United States, this time, I mean, Iran moved toward more cooperation with China. And we could see that both countries could strike a deal a strategic one for a long-term cooperation between the two countries. And there have been cooperation on different aspects, as you mentioned. I think this can continue because China is an important country, and it is working not just with Iran in the region, but with other countries in the region. It is working with Saudi Arabia, it is working with Turkey and many others in the region and beyond the region, because it is expected to be the #1 economic power in the decades to come. So you cannot ignore such a big country for cooperation, and Iran is doing the same. But there can be different issues that both countries might have, maybe some issues. They can engage, they can work. I think the point is that to engage constructively rather than to politicize it. When it came to the, let's say, different issues, we could see that the Americans trying to do some propaganda against China. And I think this was mostly to politicize the issue and to benefit from, let's say, Chinophobia, than to help to resolve those issues that they mentioned. And with having said that, I think Iran has tried to engage on issues without politicizing them.
Thank you very much. Really, it was a good answer. Now, I'd like to ask the Iran's foreign policy concerning to South Caucasus issue. As I mentioned, Iran is one of the most important regional actors in the South Caucasus as well. And the relations with region countries is also important for not only for Iran, but also for region countries. My question is concerning to the Second Karabakh War. We know that Azerbaijan could make free its occupied territories after 30 years from Armenia. And generally, I don't want to ask the classical questions. Just as a researcher, I'd like to know your view, your expressions concerning to it. Because during the Karabakh War, there were a lot of media in Azerbaijan especially, which tried to show that Iran tries to help Armenia, and Iran remains on the side of Armenia against Azerbaijan. Is it true, or how can you analyze this issue? Because, of course, when I would answer to my own question, I would say that, of course, officially, Iran recognized the territorial integrity of Azerbaijan and tried a lot to Azerbaijan in different times. But generally, this kind of rumors, which I call it rumors, is it true that Iran somehow, or some lobbies in Iran supported Armenia against Azerbaijan? Is it true?
Well, no, I can say that Iran has had good relations with both capitals and with both countries, Azerbaijan as well as Armenia. But during the Karabakh War, we could see some maybe materials or some news and reports on media that were not accurate. They were blaming Iran for helping Armenia against Azerbaijan, but that was not the case. Interestingly, we could see that other groups were blaming Iran for supporting Azerbaijan against Armenia. And I think it was no secret. And we could see the reaction from Azerbaijani president as well as senior officials thanking Iran and Iranian leader for its support of Azerbaijan in freeing the occupied lands. It was no secret, it was public, and Azerbaijan officials were happy with this. So, and I think it was clear, and those reports I think were inaccurate and were aimed at maybe disrupting the relations of Tehran and Baku, and in order to maybe somehow deteriorate the situation. But that was not the case. Iran's policy toward Azerbaijan has been very clear, and we can see that even officials and both a determination to improve the relations, and they are serious about this. And Iran also, in parallel, have had its own relations with Armenia, but this doesn't mean that Iran would help Armenia against Azerbaijan. But the criticism in the country was interestingly the vice versa. They were saying that Iran is supporting Azerbaijan against Armenia. What you're saying was more visible outside the country than inside the country, because a large amount of the portion of the population in Iran, they are speaking Azeri. We have eastern and western Azerbaijan provinces in Iran. In addition to that, those provinces, we have other provinces who are speaking in, let's say, Azeri language. So both countries have had good relations, but in the afterwards of I think the war, Iran has been engaged in talks with countries like Azerbaijan, Armenia, Turkey, and Russia, in order to make sure that there can be mechanisms in order to maybe find a solution, maybe find a way to serve the interests of all countries. There might be some concerns in Iran that maybe some countries in the region, they do not bypass Iran when it comes to transit, and to make sure that they can find a common and joint solutions to the problems, and in order to find, let's say, ideas in order to benefit even economically, politically, while having security in the region. And this can make the solution durable and that can last for long. So I think Iran, this is very clear and visible for me in Tehran, that has a strong determination for good relations with Azerbaijan. They have lots of common ground from culture. Let's say they have geographic proximity. Even when it comes to language, some parts of Iran share the same language with the country, religion, and lots of other issues. And when you are neighbors, I think stability in both countries would benefit them both, as well as some other countries who are neighboring with them. Iran is also neighbor to Turkey. Some other countries also in the region, they can benefit from this. So I can say that they were mostly not accurate. And I think if you look at the authentic situation in the ground back then, we could see that that was not the case.
Thank you very much. One of my questions is to the last Armenian elections. For example, Pashinyan won the elections, and as I know, if I have not missed, there is no any congratulation from Iranian side to Pashinyan right now, right? Or
I think Iranian, I could see that Iranian foreign ministry spokesman congratulated Armenia for the, I think, healthy or good election that they held. Okay. That was the news that I heard, I think, today. And we have been seeing that Iran has been involved itself by the election. This was something that was consuming the attention of many officials, factions in the country. But I could see the position by the foreign ministry spokesman. Maybe because that was today, it has not been reflected in foreign media yet.
Probably I have missed that issue. And we know that Iran was also one of the supporters of 3+3 format in the South Caucasus region directly after the end of Second Karabakh War, which Turkey tried to create this stable region without any crisis, and Iran was supporter. And my question is again, far from these classic questions, most of researchers is also tries to show that Turkey and Iran are not cooperated neither in Central Asia nor in South Caucasus, and they are rivals. How do you think? Are Turkey and Iran rivals in these regions, or they are cooperates? What's your view, analysis, strategically?
I think maybe the view or maybe the concerns that have existed in both sides, in Turkey and in Iran, to some extent in the case that maybe it has been more rivalry than cooperation, to be honest, I think. So, but when it comes to transit, I said that Iran wants to make sure that other countries, including even Turkey, do not bypass Iran when it comes to this. And it wants to see that Iran also can benefit from this in the region. When it comes to different parts of this region, I think it has been mostly rivalry, but with Iranian foreign minister as well as previously deputy foreign minister paying visits to Turkey and some other countries, I think that was intended to shift from rivalry to cooperation. Whether this can happen, yes, but if it will happen or not, I'm not sure, and time will tell us. The potential and the capacity is there, but whether that can happen or not, I think is up to both capitals. That depends on, Ankara as well as Tehran. So I think if we want to have, as I said, a durable and long-lasting solution, I think you cannot gain your benefit at the costs of the benefit of the other side. So you need to have be looking to some, let's say, solutions that does not ignore the interests and benefits of the other side. In that case, I think we can shift this rivalry into cooperation. The possibility is there, but whether that will happen or not, I'm not sure. I don't know. But maybe time can tell us in future more about this.
Thank you very much. Now I am at the end of my question. Actually, personally, I wanted to finish with this question, but I remember that from the beginning, you have never mentioned the name of Israel. I don't know whether it was intentionally or not. Now there are in both countries new governments. How do you see it? Is there any probability that these countries somehow will have any cooperation in the near future? What should be done for this kind of cooperation between Iran and Israel?
Well, I said that even there could be no relations or diplomatic ties between Iran and the United States, let alone Israel. I don't think that with a change of administration in Iran, this will change for better, but maybe it can change for worse. And we have been seeing that even conservative administrations having harsher tone toward Israel. And this is a policy which is at this level of establishment. And for sure, I can say with further certainty that the policy of the country would not change toward Israel, and we cannot, at least I myself cannot see any cooperation for the time maybe to come and for a foreseeable future. Because this is not something new. It didn't happen during Rouhani administration. It existed before, as of the revolution. And interestingly, even before the revolution, there were, challenges, or the view that Iran had toward Israel was something maybe specific. It is not just a case of the government, but the public in Iran also share similar views to the government when it comes to Israel, because they have sympathy toward Palestinian people. And I think what has been happening in Palestine in the past couple of months has been very important, and we have been seeing some new developments there which are important, and they can be discussed independently at a very, let's say, detailed time and extensive time, and there can be a detailed discussion on that. So I'm not seeing a change in that, and maybe even if there's a change, that would not be going toward the softer, let's say, side. It can be somehow more, stricter. But I can say that the policy is beyond the administration. It doesn't mean that the administration wants to pursue something different, but there is, I can say, it is one of the areas that there is agreement between different factions. Even we have been seeing some reformist politicians and officials that they have been, let's say, having very strict and harsh, let's say, views and policies toward Israel. So, and now that we are seeing a new conservative administration, for sure, there cannot be any change.
Thank you very much, Mr. Aslani, for your this kind of sincere and warm expressions, views. I believe that in the future we will again to turn to your minds, expressions concerning to regional issues. Thank you very much.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me on, and I hope that I will be able to join you again in future.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.